dramatically, and it's a big problem for the president and Republican candidates. White women now prefer Democratic candidates by 20 points. That's a 40-point swing in just, 18 or 19 months.
What do you think that could mean? I mean, you got 42 open Republican seats, 42. So what could that mean come November?
It could mean that you're looking at Speaker Nancy Pelosi, to be very blunt about it here. It's a math problem. It is a problem for the president, the White House, and Republicans. And it's his message doesn't really. There's also a disconnect here. Republican candidates in these vulnerable or in these close districts, they're talking about creating jobs. The president goes out and he says, we've created a lot of jobs already. These Republican candidates aren't really talking about the economy as something that's booming. We just saw the president yesterday come out under the South Portico and take what amounted to a victory lap. And he deserved to take a victory lap. The economy is in good shape. The GDP just grew by 4.1% in the last quarter. So the president is feeling great about the economy, but Republican candidates, especially in these close districts and close Senate races, they don't want to overpromise. They don't want to say the economy's booming in case growth slows next quarter, in case the job creation numbers, which have been strong, if that slows between now and Election Day, and Republican candidates are saying, are basically taking ownership of the economy the way the president did yesterday, then they could be in big trouble, because even though the economy has been growing faster under President Trump, there's still a lot of worry out there in America.
What if, though, it continues? I mean, that's something they certainly can claim as a tremendous victory.
Well, that is definitely something to watch. If the economy continues to grow, if the job numbers continue to take on a positive trajectory, I think it's pretty safe to say that Republican candidates are going to start talking about the economy and are going to start, just like the president did yesterday, taking ownership of it.
And Reince Priebus, former White House chief of staff and head of the RNC, who knows something about polls, he actually looks at it the other way. He says the president's approval numbers are terrific, and he's like putting up that wall against the blue wave. Here's what he had to say.
Without this good news, the president's approval number was anywhere from 8 to 13 points higher today than it was on Election Day when he won. So on Election Day when he won, the president was at 37%. Today he's anywhere from 45 to 50. The president's approval numbers alone are problematic for them.
Right.
So he's claiming the president's approval numbers are terrific, and that's great for the president, but the president's not running for Congress. So how do they translate that into all these congressional races?
Well, I think what Mr. Priebus is getting at there is what folks will tell a pollster on the phone and what they actually do when they go vote. And we definitely saw that last time. The polls were not correct. They had Hillary Clinton winning, and it looked like winning fairly comfortably. That, of course, did not happen. So the president and the Republican officials are definitely banking on the same thing happening here, that he has longer coattails than the polls show. And Democrats are worried about that.
And John, I'm going to ask you to make a prediction. What do you think is going to happen when it comes to the House?
Oh, I don't really get into the prediction business. That's not what reporters do. But I will say this is an uphill fight for the president and Republicans. But I'm somewhat skeptical that this is going to be a blue tidal wave. I think I don't think it's going to be maybe the washout that others think. But to be sure, the president and Vice President Mike Pence and other Republicans, they do have a lot of work to do here to minimize the damage.
And quickly, the Democrats, they've gotten some women, veterans, and a lot of kind of more moderate conservative candidates in some of these swing districts. So they've got a little secret sauce going on in there.
Well, that's right. In some of these competitive races, you won't be surprised to learn that the candidates don't sound that differently. They have to kind of tilt to the center in what they're talking about. And again, there's a lot of talk about jobs. There's a lot of talk about how to preserve the healthcare system. Obamacare, actually, more Americans support keeping it and fixing it than repealing and replacing it. It's like 48 to 40 in most polls, give or take, given the poll. So, you know, that's what these candidates in these close districts are talking about. There aren't big, you know, ideological differences here. They're very close. But when the president lands on Air Force One and he gets behind the podium at these rallies, it's a very different message than what Republican candidates are delivering. And I'm just not, it's too early, I think, to say how that disconnect is going to resonate. But as you alluded to, if the economy continues to be strong, I look for some of these Republican candidates to inch closer to the president.
Okay. All right. We'll see if that indeed turns out. John Bennett of Roll Call. John, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Of course. Alicia?
President Trump blasting his former personal attorney's reported claim that he knew about a meeting at Trump Tower in 2016 with a Russian lawyer. How this has turned into a battle of credibility. Plus, Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh preparing to meet with Red State Senator Joe Manchin. What can we expect as other Democrats voice their opposition? News alert, President Trump firing back at new allegations from his one-time lawyer, Michael Cohen, who claims then-candidate Trump knew in advance about a 2016 Trump Tower meeting between members of his campaign and a Russian attorney promising dirt on Hillary Clinton. This coming just days after Cohen leaked a recording of he and the president discussing a payment to a former Playboy model who claims to have had an affair with Mr. Trump. Jillian Turner has more from our D.C. bureau.
Michael Cohen, President Trump's longtime lawyer, is now claiming his boss approved the infamous Trump Tower meeting that's become a feature in the Mueller probe. The meeting took place in New York City on June 9th of 2016 and included Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, and Kremlin lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya. The president taking to Twitter yesterday to reinforce a claim he's made several times, saying, "I did not know of the meeting with my son, Don Jr. Sounds to me like someone's trying to make up stories in order to get himself out of an unrelated jam." Now, the president's son has also long insisted that his father had no knowledge of this meeting.
It was such a nothing. There was nothing to tell. I mean, I wouldn't have even remembered it until you start scouring through the stuff. It was literally just a wasted 20 minutes, which was a shame.
This claim from Cohen comes just days after someone leaked a recording of a conversation between him and President Trump about hush money paid to a Playboy model. Now the president's inner circle is speaking out on the matter, and they're painting an unflattering portrait of Cohen.
Number one, he lied to people about taping them, both the president and other people. And not only that, he went to subterfuge in order to do it, like a whole little game, which shows how pathological he is.
Looking ahead, in just a few days' time, the trial of former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort will kick off in Arlington, Virginia. Insiders anticipate that witnesses there will also be asked about this meeting. Alicia?
Jillian Turner, thank you. Eric.
Well, Alicia, Republicans, well, they believe they are in a prime position to pick up a Senate seat in Indiana. That's where Democratic incumbent Senator Joe Donnelly. Well, he's facing a tough re-election, they say, against his Republican opponent, Mike Braun. And they say it could come down to who supports the president's Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh. Mike Tobin in Indiana with more.
Indiana's incumbent Senator Joe Donnelly is one of those red state Democrats up for re-election who's in a pinch over President Trump's pick for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh.
How you doing?
Mike Braun, the Republican challenger, is in a comfortable position as his opponent is now caught between the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who vowed to fight the Kavanaugh confirmation, and the will of Hoosier voters, who voted overwhelmingly by 19 points in favor of President Trump.
I think it's tough when you belong to a party like Joe does, where he'd like to vote otherwise, but he's got to check with Chuck Schumer on every vote.
But Donnelly voting for Kavanaugh would not come as a complete surprise. He is a pro-life Democrat, and he voted to confirm Trump's earlier pick, Neil Gorsuch. Now he's under pressure, even on Indiana's airwaves, to do the same for Kavanaugh.
Will Senator Joe Donnelly cave to the extreme left or confirm a new justice and protect our rights?
The story remains the same.
Conservative Indiana radio host Todd Huff says his listeners want Donnelly to give Kavanaugh an unbiased look, absent of politics.
People are tired of this vitriol, and I think folks want a fair hearing for this guy. And when you hear the Democrats come out and say, we're against this guy without even knowing who he is.
With the race neck and neck, Indiana voters think Donnelly will need to cast the Trump-friendly vote.
I think he's going to have to disappoint his party and vote in favor of the nominee. And then we'll see where the chips fall, because he still could lose in November.
Donnelly thus far has been non-committal on the sensitive vote, releasing only a statement saying he will take the same approach he did for the last Supreme Court vacancy, adding that he, quote, will carefully review and consider the record and qualifications of Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Most Senate Democrats have been refusing the customary meeting with Judge Kavanaugh, demanding Republicans produce paperwork about his past beforehand. Senator Donnelly went ahead and scheduled one anyway. The Mike Braun campaign accused him of caving to pressure. In Indiana, Mike Tobin, Fox News.
And another red state Democrat feeling the pressure to vote for President Trump's Supreme Court pick is Senator Joe Manchin. The West Virginia lawmaker will be the first from his party to meet with Brett Kavanaugh on Monday. So what can we expect? Let's bring in our political panel. Shermichael Singleton is a Republican political consultant who has worked on campaigns for Newt Gingrich, Mitt Romney, and Ben Carson. And Ben Kissel is a radio talk show host and political commentator. Thank you, gentlemen, both, for joining us. Ben, I do want to start with you. Why is Senator Manchin taking this meeting? Why is he doing it now?
Well, I think Manchin is probably going to do the exact same thing he did regarding Neil Gorsuch. I think he's going to support Kavanaugh the exact same way he did Gorsuch, and I wouldn't be surprised if Donnelly and of course Heitkamp out of North Dakota does the same thing. Right now, unfortunately, the Democrats are like a football team taking the field with 8 players going against a team with a full squad, and I don't see how they're going to be able to stop this. However, I would like to point out, I believe that I believe the confirmation of Kavanaugh should wait until after the Mueller investigation, because it's a total conflict of interest. If they do decide to indict Donald Trump, to have Kavanaugh decide that case, I think is really something the American people don't want to see.
Well, and Shermichael, I want to get your thoughts on Senator Manchin, but also with regard to the Mueller investigation, we don't know how long this is going to last.
Well, sure, we don't know, but to talk about Manchin first, as was previously stated, you do have 3 senators who did vote for Judge Gorsuch, and I'm almost certain they're going to vote for Kavanaugh pretty soon. Look, I think Democrats are running a fool's errand here by trying to convince every single senator to vote against this guy without even talking and sitting down with him. Now, as a conservative, I got to tell you, I hope they do play this game, because they're almost guaranteeing that Republicans will increase our majority in the Senate. As it pertains to the Mueller investigation, I do not think we should wait to vote for Kavanaugh. That investigation will come to an end whenever it does. There is still business that has to occur. The president needs to do his job, and the senators need to do their job by confirming someone who is obviously qualified.
And Ben, go ahead.
But when it comes to the Mueller investigation, it is very interesting to have a Supreme Court nominee chosen by Donald Trump who has publicly said a sitting president cannot be indicted. This is not an accident. This is obviously a character trait and a quality that Donald Trump likes in Kavanaugh, and I do believe it's a total conflict of interest.
Well, Brett, that's actually not accurate. You're talking about a statement that Kavanaugh made back in the 90s, I believe, during the Clinton administration, and he actually several years later came out and stated, you know, during that time, my legal thinking and understanding was slightly different. I have since changed. So that's not a logical argument or a fair argument to make.
I think it is a fair argument to make in regards to why did Donald Trump choose him. I'm sure that played a big role.
He chose him because of his qualifications, because he came highly qualified. That's why
he is one of the judges that are highly qualified.
So would you have preferenced someone else from that list versus Kavanaugh, who most folks would consider to be similar to Kennedy?
I mean, I think that he is more conservative than Justice Kennedy, who he clerked under, and of course, Justice Kennedy being a center-right candidate. At this point right now, there are a lot of things that are at risk, specifically a lot of rights when it comes to choice and things like that. It's a very big Supreme Court nomination, and unfortunately, once again, because it's a simple majority, I don't think the Democrats have a lot of ground to fight on.
It's very
I do need
easy
to step in here because I only have so much love to go on forever about this, but I did want to mention, as you know, Vice President Mike Pence was talking to Maria Bartiromo about this. She has an interview that'll be airing tomorrow. Here's what he had to say.
Judge Brett Kavanaugh has that judicial philosophy. He has a proven record. That's what the president made this nomination about. That's the message we'll carry to Republicans and Democrats in the Senate. And we remain confident that before the fall is out, that Judge Brett Kavanaugh will be Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
Sure, Michael, I'm going to let you comment on that.
Look, I'm going to say this. As a conservative, we want someone who's going to uphold the Constitution, uphold the law. The law is blind on race, on sex, on socioeconomics, and I have the highest expectation that Judge Kavanaugh will do just that, as he has every single time as judge on the D.C. Circuit Court.
Okay, and thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. That went fast. So thanks for the conversation, Sir Michael Singleton and Ben Kissel. Thank you both so much.
Thanks so much.
Well, the Trump administration says immigrant families are being reunited, but reports say some may never be. This as there is new pushback on the president's zero-tolerance policy. We'll have some new reaction on the Saturday from lawmakers and on the progress next. As those efforts continue to try and reunite all those families who are separated at our southern border, this 2 days after a court-ordered deadline to do just that. Well, the Trump administration says it has reunited all what it calls eligible families. But, you know, Democrats and some activists are calling that claim into question, even saying some children may never be reunited with their parents. Garrett Tenney is live in Washington with the very latest on how that progress is going. Hi, Garrett.
Well, Eric, as you mentioned, the Department of Homeland Security says it has reunited every eligible parent with their children. More than 700 kids remain separated, though, and DHS says those parents are ineligible for a variety of reasons. Some have criminal records suggesting the child wouldn't be safe in their custody, but a majority of parents were deemed ineligible because they have already been deported out of the country. The ACLU is slamming the administration for allowing that to happen, tweeting this morning in part, some 463 parents were deported without their children, and the government isn't even trying to reunite them. But according to DHS, 120 parents chose not to be reunited with their children before returning home. In a court filing this week, lawyers with the ACLU argued, though, that some of those parents either misunderstood or were misled by the government and never meant to leave their children in the U.S. Democratic lawmakers are suggesting some parents and children may never be reunited. In a statement, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto said in part, there appears to be no plan to reunify children with parents that have already been deported without their informed consent, and no guidelines as to how this administration is deciding who is eligible to be reunited and who is not. DHS says it will continue to make every effort to reunify the remaining adults and children who are eligible, or find family members who can act as guardians for the kids while the court process plays out. So this initial court battle may be over, but this issue is far from being settled. Eric?
Yeah, absolutely not. Thank you, Garrett. Alicia?
A historic move by Pope Francis, stripping the former Archbishop of Washington, D.C. of his title amid sex abuse allegations against him. Details next.